All right, everybody, we are going to go ahead and start. Welcome to our Great Books series here at the Church of Christ on Fishinger Road. We are recording. People can hear you all over the world talking. All right. A little bit of intro. We are going to go through just a teeny introduction. I had more for the intro, and it was like there's just way too much information for us to spend a lot of time with that. But we will have some introductory remarks. Then we'll talk about the author, and then we'll do an overview as we typically do with these things. And I kept going back and forth. Should I talk about the characters first or the plot first? And I'm going to kind of intermingle that. And then we'll look at some of the lessons that we gained from this, the ways in which Tolkien led his Christianity. He was a Catholic in there in England. The way he allowed that to come through in his work. And so just a little bit on the intro. The impact of the Lord of the Rings has been quite extensive. It's been quite amazing, actually. In fact, Tolkien is sometimes called the father of modern fantasy. He really kind of set a genre that there wasn't a whole lot having to do with that necessarily before, but again, modern fantasy. And he's kind of the father of that. He did a lot of work in language. He knew a lot of languages. Lynn was mentioning the Finnish language, and it was one of the foundations for his Elvish language that we find in The Hobbit and in The Lord of the Rings and other things like that. Just really pretty amazing the things that he was able to do with his education. He did teach at the University of Leeds. I'll go through some of his biography in a little bit, but he spent most of his time at Oxford University, where he knew C.S. Lewis, and they would hang out in his offices. There was also a little pub nearby the campus where he and C.S. Lewis would meet with other people that just wanted to talk about literature and talk about writing and those kind of things. And so that group was called the Inklings. And therefore, Greg was just pushing so hard to call it the Inklings for 1 year. And I'm kidding. Brandon wanted to call it the Inklings. So, but anyway, that's kind of where that came from. And he was part of that. The way in which once Peter Jackson, he's a director, once he made the trilogy of movies, there have been some animated movies, there have been some other movies done in the past, but Peter Jackson, when he did the movies that he did, he formed a company, and that it was a CGI company. It was really the first one ever to be involved with CGI exclusively, Wingnut Productions or something like that. And it changed some, considering how movies are made. I mean, between Tolkien's books and then the adaptations of the books in the movies and other places, it's had a huge impact. People even travel to New Zealand to see where they filmed The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings, at least. And so that's Clinton Mariah Markham hanging out in New Zealand at a little hobbit hole. And so anyway, asked them to send me that. So there's been a great impact on our culture. All right, so let's go through some biographical stuff here. J.R.R. Tolkien, his full name is John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. He was born on January 3rd, 1892, and then he passed away in 1973. So some of us were alive when he passed. Our lives crossed just a little bit for some of us. In 1904, he was orphaned at just age 12. His dad had died. He was born in South Africa, by the way, which was not called South Africa at the time, but he was a British citizen. His dad died down there when he was just maybe 3 or 4. He never knew his father. His father had rheumatoid fever or something like that. And then his mom, when he was 12, passed away, and she had gotten ill. And so he was in an orphanage, and he married Edith Bratt. They actually met at the orphanage, and they had a little, they were living in the same home, and but they kind of were attracted to each other, you know, as those things kind of go. And they moved from one home to another, but there was a Catholic priest who was over the orphanage, and he found out that they were, you know, that they liked each other, or however you'd put that, and forbid Tolkien to talk to her ever again. And they moved one of them to another orphanage, and he just didn't want anything unseemly happening in one of their houses, which is understandable. Um, Tolkien, when he turned, the very night he turned 21, he wrote Edith a letter and said, because that's when legally he was not under anyone's authority anymore. He was his own man at 21 back then. He wrote her a letter that night saying that he had never stopped loving her. He wanted to see her. You know, I mean, I don't know if he said in that letter, I hope it leads to marriage. She was engaged to someone else, but she dropped that engagement and they ended up getting married just shortly after that. They were married in, as you can see, in 1916. And there's a picture of them as youngsters on the left. And then they were able to stay married. They both lived to a ripe old age, I guess you'd say. And really, really pretty cool that they were able to do that. He did right after, less than 3 months after they were married, he had to go off to World War One, and he fought. He was on the front. Let me see. Let me pull up that picture. He was in the 1st Battalion. I don't think people know if he's actually in that picture, but that is his group of men. And even if he was, everyone's facing the other way. But he was in the 1st Battalion. But he kept getting sick and kept having injuries and things happening like that. And so he was declared unfit to actually be fighting after about a year and a half of being in the military. So he would do other things. He did other things for the military during World War One, but didn't have to fight after like 18 months or 24, which obviously, hopefully, it might have kept him alive. So when he was done with military service, his first job was working on the Oxford English Dictionary. So he would do the words that had a Germanic background, and he would write etymologies and things like that. And then he was hired by the University of Leeds in 1920. And then he was at Oxford University all the way until he retired. So he was at Oxford University for most of his time. In 1937, he wrote The Hobbit, meant to be and is a children's book. And so it's a little easier. Jennifer's debating that, but a little easier to read than The Lord of the Rings. And she just feels that way because there's a whole world with Tolkien. There's a whole geography to Middle Earth. There are languages that he had created. He created a ton of languages. He created the language of Mordor. He created the Elven language. He even had languages for the dwarves. I mean, he just created these languages. He was definitely into language. So anyway, he wrote The Hobbit in 1937. He wrote The Lord of the Rings in 1954 and 55. And so the first third of The Lord of the Rings was published in 54. So was the second third. And then the third third, The Return of the King, was published in 1955. It was never meant to be really 3 separate things. It was one big collection in 6 books. But each of the books that we have now contain 2 books, and we'll go through the contents in just a little bit. He retires from Oxford in 1959, and then he passed away in 72 or 73. Sorry about that. He was 81 years old. This is the grave site, and it's over there in England. It's not super far from Oxford. I guess not anything super far from anything else in England, but it was more toward the coast. They had retired off for their health. They had gotten to a little bit of a better place for themselves. You'll notice on the tombstone, Tolkien had the names Luthien and Beren put on the tombstone. And besides that, it's a pretty normal tombstone. Just has their names and the dates. But that is because he wrote a story called Beren and Luthien and it was a story of their love. And so those words are actually on their tombstone, and you can buy that book today. You see, they had several children. They had at least 3 sons. Christopher's the youngest son, and he has taken advantage of the, no, I'm just joking. He got a lot more of Tolkien's work out there into the world, including this story, which Tolkien had written, but he edited it a little bit, made it a little bit better for publication, and then it was published like within the last 10 years. I mean, it hasn't been super long. Tolkien wrote a lot of stuff and just never published. He just, so notes and things that he had, other stories from Middle Earth, and people have also written other stories from Middle Earth besides things that he had thought up. But these things are available now, and so really pretty neat. So that's just a little bit on Tolkien. There are so many neat stories. If you just go to Wikipedia and look up J.R.R. Tolkien, his military service, there are, if you hit the scroll bar on Google, I mean, 2 or 3 pages worth of information just on his military service, which was just a year or 2 or 3. Oh, I should mention he was the military there in England, Great Britain. They wanted him to do decoding work during World War II, so they approached him to do that. He went through the training, and then they decided his services weren't needed, and so they didn't end up hiring him. But that would have been, he still was at Oxford, and that would have been, about 10 or 15 years before his retirement. But he was a sought after kind of guy. He eventually had to take his phone number out of the phone books there in England. I mean, he didn't like the public attention. He didn't like being a celebrity, and he didn't like some of the things that were done with his books. Back in the 60s and 70s, sometimes protesters here in the United States would have signs that say "Frodo lives," and just using his characters and his things to push political agendas, that he had nothing to do with at all. But these books, and that was obviously way before the movies. The books had a really big impact on culture. Okay, so a little bit of an overview, and so I'm gonna just give you the basic big outline here. So the first book of the 3 of the trilogy is the Fellowship of the Ring, and first of all, the ring sets out, and so spoiler alerts throughout this presentation tonight, but Frodo's father, Bill, or not his father, that he called him an uncle, but he was really just a cousin. But his uncle Bilbo had you need to read The Hobbit. His uncle Bilbo obtained the ring just accidentally, and then it was handed down to Frodo. And there's a ton of information there that I'm not saying, but just trust. And so finally, Gandalf the wizard, I just lost a bunch of you now. No, I'm joking. Gandalf finally figures out that it is the one ring to rule them all. Sauron, way back when, back in before the Third Age, even of Middle Earth, had given 9 rings to men, 3 to elves, 5 to dwarves. But what he didn't tell any of them is that these rings of power, even though they benefited these men, the elves and the dwarves, the one ring would rule them all, and they would all end up being corruptive in nature. So the one ring, though, is lost. Isildur, an ancestor of Aragorn, one of the characters in the book, he cuts off Sauron's finger in battle and ends up with the ring. Well, he loses it, and then this guy named Gollum, we'll talk about him in a little bit, he finds it. Bilbo gets it when he loses it, and Bilbo hung on to it for a long time. But the bottom line is the whole goal of the book, the whole goal of the trilogy, Frodo is going to try to destroy that ring. And the only way to destroy it is to get it back into the fires of Mordor in the lower right hand of the map. So that's the goal. That's the big plot, and it ends up being destroyed. So they do accomplish the big goal. But anyway, the ring sets out. That's the first half of the first book. And then the second half of the first book, the ring goes south. And so I'm going to step away from the recording just for a second. But you guys get a little bonus coverage. this is where Hobbiton is, this is where Frodo lives and the other hobbits. And they end up in Rivendell. That's an elven stronghold and home city. And from there, a group sets out. We'll talk about all the people that were part of that fellowship, and it goes south. So the 9 people are with this ring. Frodo's carrying it, and they're gonna try to get down to Mordor to destroy that. All right, so book 1 ends in Rivendell, and then book 2 sets out from that location and heads south. Then the Two Towers. And here we have the treason of Isengard. There's another wizard named Saruman, who was good, Saruman the White, but he is corrupted by the evil of Mordor, the evil of Sauron. So we have the treason of Isengard, kind of that whole first half there, and all the troubles they have as the Fellowship is trying to move. Well, the Fellowship at the end of book 2, at the end of The Ring Goes South, the Fellowship is broken. And then in the Two Towers, the treason of Isengard, and then the Ring goes east. And so the Two Towers, it's always been, that was the hardest book for me in the past to get through. And part of it was that the whole first half is basically talking about what's left of the Fellowship, not the actual ring bearer, Frodo, and his friend Sam, but all the rest. And so it kind of centers on all that. And then you go back in time to back where you were at the beginning of the second book, The Two Towers, for book 4, and it focuses in on Frodo and Sam. And so it was always hard for me. This time, when Greg assigned this to me, I decided to go ahead about 3 weeks ago. I thought, I'm going to read them again to be ready for this, or maybe it was a month ago, whenever. I just had them in my hands pretty constantly. The Two Towers was wonderful. I had just forgotten. I mean, it was absolutely incredible. So the whole trilogy is really, really neat. I had just forgotten the last time I had read it, how it went, and some of the really cool things in it. What the movies do, which is nice, Peter Jackson's movies, it goes more chronological. It still jumps back and forth between Merry and Pippin and Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli. You know, it moves, but it's not just a whole half of a book and another half of a book. It's like every 10 or 15 minutes, the movie switches back and forth, which makes it much more, it makes it easier to keep in mind the chronology of what's happening in the story. The Two Towers, just an interesting little side note here. Tolkien almost called it the Four Towers, and just, you know, because the book is talking about all these different towers, and he decided to go with Two Towers, and he decided to go with Saruman's place, and then the Tower of Sauron, the tower there where he was dwelling, so to speak, at the top of the tower. And this, Tolkien drew this picture himself. And so Tolkien had finally decided, you know what, we're just going to go with the White Tower and the Black Tower. And that's how we're going to, we're going to call it the Two Towers. And you see one of the Nazgul, you all know what a Nazgul is, of course. You see one of them flying between the two towers in the picture. Again, Tolkien's creation. He didn't consider himself a great map maker or a great artist or any, but everything that we see of his was actually very, very nice and very cool. And then finally, The Return of the King, the third book of the trilogy, The War of the Ring in book 5, and then book 6, The End of the Third Age. The end of the Third Age is where the ring actually gets destroyed, but then there's still work to do, which is really interesting. The movie, if you've seen the movie, you know it has like 10 or 12 endings. The book has 10 or 12 endings, in fact more. The movie actually didn't focus in on a lot of what happens from the destruction of the ring to the end of the book. There are over 100 pages from where the ring gets destroyed and then the end of the book. And so there's a lot of material there at the end. Okay, that's just kind of a big giant overview. Oh, I did have one more thing at the bottom. The Tale of Aragorn and Arwen. Tolkien did not put it in the book. He put it in one of the appendices. But he felt it was essential for the story. But the books are, it's kind of like The Princess Bride, where you know, the grandfather's reading to the grandson. There's kind of the backstory on how you get the story. Well, with this, Tolkien was just insistent that this is from the Hobbit's standpoint. This is from the Hobbit's point of view. And so you have the Hobbit that was written by Bilbo, and then Frodo finishes that and writes the Lord of the Rings. All this is fictional, but it's Frodo's writing, and so it's from his perspective. And so J.R.R. Tolkien did not want to put the tale of Aragorn and Arwen into the actual Lord of the Rings text, into the actual narrative. And so it's in a supplement, but he calls it essential. He says to understand what's happening, you really need to read that tale. And so I don't know if that's exactly true, but from his perspective, it is. That gives a completion, kind of shows Aragorn's background, who is a man but has some elf in his background, and then Arwen, who is full elf. All right. 100% elf. All right. So the picture on the screen is the picture from the Peter Jackson movies, just to give you perspective. The four hobbits are in the front, and then the next person is Gandalf. He's the wizard. He's the one with the staff. And then Aragorn and Boromir are men, and Aragorn is on the far left of the picture, and Boromir is on the far right. And then Legolas, between Gandalf and Boromir, is an elf, and Gimli is the short one over here, a dwarf, but he's a little taller than the hobbits. Something that we don't really get in the movies that really comes through very strongly in the books. There's a time when Merry and Pippin, the two hobbits on the right, there's a time they spend with the living trees, the Ents, E-N-T, and they're drinking of their water while they're with them. And when they come back to the Shire, they are like significantly taller than Frodo and Sam, the two hobbits on the left side. And in the book, it comes through really clearly. People are looking at them and wondering how they're 6 inches to a foot taller than they were. But in the movie, of course, they didn't go into all that detail. But anyway, kind of neat. Okay, so let me go through the characters a little bit. Jordan, when he was during one of his last presentations, talked about the different kinds of literature. And I don't know if Tolkien would have labeled this way, but this is definitely a journey of maturing. This is definitely a story. Everyone changes that's in this picture, but especially the hobbits. And as Tolkien said, this is a story centered on the hobbits. And so they grow, they mature, their perspectives change. And again, I don't want to throw anything into what Tolkien was thinking, without him saying that he was thinking it, but with his background of Christianity and the whole theme of good against evil, he definitely would have had in mind, I think, the idea of growth and how these people grew. Even Boromir, the man on the right, on the far right, he ends up dying, but he ends up dying saving two of the hobbits. And even though he had his bad moments, he ended well and ended strong. And so you have that whole idea of the journey to maturity, the journey to growing up, so to speak. So about the hobbits, just a little bit. The hobbits live in peace. They live in a world, an Eden-like environment, a heaven-like environment. They live in a place where really there's no trouble. They have sheriffs in Hobbiton, but they're never used. They don't have to do anything. There's no trouble where they are. And so for the hobbits to leave this Eden-like place to basically save the world by getting rid of this ring of power, taking away Sauron's power is quite amazing and really, really neat as you go through the story. Frodo is the main character of the book. He is the ring bearer, and he's called that some. He volunteers to do it, which is important. And the hobbits seem to have, to everyone, and even to Gandalf, the wizard, they seem to have a resistance to the ring that men do not have. The men, for Aragorn or Boromir to take the ring, or for Gandalf as a wizard to have that ring of power, would have been a disaster. Apparently, those would not be able to withstand the pull of the evil in the ring. But the hobbits have a stamina for this kind of thing that amazes everyone. So that's kind of cool. Gandalf is the main wizard in the story. Saruman, one of his colleagues, so to speak, turns evil. Gandalf doesn't quite really get that in time. He's held captive for a while, but then escapes. Aragorn has a lot of different names because he's been living for hundreds of years. He has some elf in him. There's a background with him. He's lived through a lot of things. And he and his other people like him are they're called rangers also in the book, and he's particularly called Strider. And they keep a lookout. They're kind of protecting things in this time of unease in the rest of the world. Boromir is of regal blood. His father's the steward of Gondor, and he has his moment where he wants the ring. He just can't. He's mesmerized by it. He wants the power to help defeat Mordor. His intentions are good, but he ends up lusting after it. He ends up with too much of a drive for it. Legolas is an elf. The elven folk also seem to have a resistance. The elves who have the three rings, they stay okay. You know, they don't end up in cahoots with Sauron. They don't end up fighting for evil. They're trying to protect, they're trying to do good still. And so they had a little more resistance to this stuff as well. And then Gimli the dwarf. Gimli and Legolas, the elf and the dwarf, you definitely learn in the books that elves and dwarves do not get along. In fact, you would really probably go to the point of saying they hate each other. And so Gimli becomes part of the Fellowship of the Ring because, well, if an elf's going, there has to be a dwarf that goes, you know, keep an eye on him, so to speak. So anyway, but they end up being the best of friends. In fact, if you look in the appendices, I glanced through all the family trees and all that kind of stuff, and Gimli's name, when you look at the big family tree of the dwarves, it says elf friend. I'm gonna cry. It says Gimli, comma, elf friend. And because they end up being tight, you know, they end up loving each other, and caring about each other, even though it's not acceptable among the elves to be a friend with a dwarf, and it's not acceptable among the dwarves to be a friend with an elf. But they end up being friends. And this common goal, and again, the lessons you're going to hear them throughout, but the idea of friendship and the idea of fellowship is huge in this. It makes a difference, and the group is able to do some things as a group that would not have been able to be done individually. And obviously, that's a picture of the church and how we should be as the kingdom of our Savior Jesus Christ. This would not be a bad place for me to mention that unlike C.S. Lewis in the Chronicles of Narnia, Tolkien does not, these are not straight allegories. You know, Frodo might be, in a sense, a Christ figure, but he doesn't accomplish what he needs to accomplish at the end. You know, certainly, and Gandalf may be a Christ figure as far as a prophet, but again, he's not. None of these, like you have the Lion and the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, and you have things that are absolutely this is an allegory of this or that or the other. Here, the themes are there, but Tolkien, it's not a direct relationship. You see the pictures of these things, but it's not quite as starkly clear as with Lewis. All right, and the evil characters now. The first evil one is Sauron. He's the main antagonist. He's almost not a character in the books. I mean, he's there, but he's more of just a power, the force of evil. He is a person. But he has no bodily form at this point because he was killed, and he needs the ring to have his full power again. And he does not have it, but he's this eye that, um, there are different, they're kind of like crystal balls. I forget what they're called. Anyway, something like that. Some people use those, and that's how he's communicating with Saruman, um, at the White Tower. But anyway, Sauron is the main evil, and he's the one who will be, he's so tied to the ring that when the ring's destroyed, he's destroyed. And so, there's a connection there, a connection of power and will. Many times that, well, I'll get to that in just a second. Saruman is the wizard that turned, the wizard that thought Sauron is just so powerful, no one can fight against. We better just join him. In fact, he tries to get Gandalf to go down that road as well before he imprisons him for a while. The Witch King of Angmar and the Ringwraiths. The Witch King is the most powerful of the 9 men who had rings, and he's the one that kind of leads the others, but he's one of the 9. And they are on horseback at the beginning of the books, searching for the ring, and they can almost sniff it out, especially if it's being used. And then in the end of the books, and I forget where that transition exactly takes place. It's probably in the Two Towers, but when their horses are destroyed at the midway point of the Fellowship of the Ring, they end up on, Gollum calls them wraiths with wings. So they're on these dinosaur looking things, and they're flying around. And anyway, they're just totally evil, just awful. They are servants of Sauron. And then you have trolls and orcs and goblins who just cause trouble all the time here and there. They're their own little evil people. Saruman, the second one down the list at the White Tower at Orthanc, he creates orcs that are more powerful and can really basically go 24/7. They're not robots, they're living beings in the books, but they're called the Uruk-hai. And they are, I'll tell you, if you see the movies, I mean, they're just as evil as can be. They don't, when I read the book this last time, I kept picturing things from the movies, but I tried to block that out and just go with what Tolkien was saying in the text, which the movie got him pretty much right, but I still have that vision of just total strength, power, evil, unending, just relentless, is how they come across in the book and in the movie. And then here's a bunch of other characters. There's just no time to go through all the characters. Arwen is Aragorn's love. She is full elf. I don't know why I'm saying it that way, but anyway, just enjoy it, I guess. So Bilbo is a very minor character in this, but he's the main character in The Hobbit. And so it just feels appropriate to put him in here. He's in Rivendell the whole time. Tom Bombadil is an angelic kind of figure. He just doesn't seem to be affected by anything. He's all in for nature. He's all in for the good of the earth. He does protect and saves the hobbits some. I mean, he's just an interesting character. There's not a whole lot about him. Someone was saying recently, knowing that we were going to do this tonight, someone here at the congregation was saying, there are so many characters in the Lord of the Rings where, we get this little glimpse, and wouldn't it be cool to know more about this character? And Tom Bombadil would definitely be one of them. Celeborn is one of the elves. Denethor is the steward of Gondor. His sons are, we've already talked about Boromir. His other son is Faramir at the top of the second column there. And Denethor, he's awful. He ends up trying to kill Faramir. Faramir is wounded in battle. Denethor knows that he's not dead, but he puts him on a pyre. He's about to have it lit, and at the last second, Gandalf comes in, thanks to Merry telling Gandalf what's going on, and he saves Faramir. Denethor still ends up killing himself. Just a terrible, terrible ending. He wasn't in cahoots with any of the evil people. He just didn't have hope. He was hopeless. once he found out Boromir was dead, he really had lost his hope before that, but he was just an individual that had no hope and had entered into despair. And so I'm going to go and I'm going to take people with me. Elrond is the head elf at Rivendell. I know there'd be a better way to word that. His daughter is, she better be up. Did I not put her? Oh, Arwen at the very top. Yeah, his daughter is Arwen. And all the elves, they have, they're not mortal. Well, I don't know how Tolkien would word that. They keep living. They can die though. So they are mortal, but they have long, long lives. Aramir and Eowyn, they are son and daughter of Theoden over here, who is the king of Rohan, the king of Rohan. And they are the horse people, and the riders of Rohan. And so anyway, he's the king of that realm. Aramir is a valiant warrior. Eowyn is a wonderful character. She wants to fight. She wants to go into battle. And just at this time, women are not allowed to do that. So she disguises herself and she goes off into battle. And she's the one that kills the Witch King. And the Witch King, before she kills him, he says, "No man has any power over me." And she sticks the sword in his face and says, "I am no man." And I thought maybe that was added into the movies as kind of a let's show some woman power here. But it's not, it's in the book. And these books written, he was creating all this. And so it's really cool. I mean, Tolkien, he has a lot of things where he is doing some things that Christ would have done. Let's make sure, I don't know, well, there wouldn't have been anyone in history that elevated women more than Christ. And so Tolkien has some of these themes in there, and she kills the Witch King. So it's just really awesome, really, really cool stuff. She ends up marrying Faramir. And you don't get a big picture of that in the movies just because they just have so much to try to cover. But in the book, you get a nice, little piece of that. So Galadriel is another elf. Glorfindel is another elf. Shelob, I should have put her in the evil characters list. But I didn't put her or Wormtongue, and I keep saying her. Shelob is a spider, like as big as this room spider is the impression I get from when you're reading it. She's just awful. And Sam thinks that she has killed Frodo at one point in the story because she had yeah, the movie really is graphic with this, not in a bad way, but just you could just picture it. But she spins Frodo and he's all wound up, and she already stung him with some of the poison. So he looks about as ashen as anyone could possibly look. Looks like a sheet of paper. And Sam thinks he's dead. And so takes the ring off of Frodo's body along with Frodo's little dagger, Sting, and has them. And so Frodo, when he wakes up from all this, he just thinks it's over. He thinks they got the ring. He's just thinking our quest has ended. There's no way we can get through this now. And Sam has the stuff. So it's pretty cool. It's a great moment. Theoden, as I mentioned, is the king of Rohan. Treebeard is the Ent. I don't know if he's over the Ents, but he's lived a long time. He's a living tree, living walking tree. But Treebeard is the one that interacts with Merry and Pippin during the story. Wormtongue, his name is, it's not really first and last name, but his other name that he goes by in the book is Grima. So Grima Wormtongue. And he is the one influencing Theoden. And Gandalf ends up going to where Theoden is and rescues him from the influence of Wormtongue. And we'll talk about the idea of influence in a little bit. And then two more characters. The ring, it's hard to call a ring a character, but it is central to the story. And the ring wants to be found, and the ring wants to get back to the master, Sauron. And so Bilbo just happens to find it, and then it's hard for Bilbo to give it to Frodo, but he finally, through inheritance, or just hands it down to Frodo. But still, it it wants to get back to Sauron, and of course Sauron wants it. And so the writing on it gives the different description of the rings, the 3 rings for the elves, the 9 for the men, the 5 for the dwarves, and 1 ring to rule them all. So anyway, all right. So kind of a character, something definitely worth noting. And then there's Gollum, and slash Smeagol, and I have it really backwards because or no, I don't. No, that's good for the pictures. One thing the movie does a great job of that, well, the book obviously Tolkien did too, but Gollum is the one who had the ring for hundreds and hundreds of years, and he's the one that lost it under the mountains, and Bilbo happened to find it. So, but he had it for the longest time. He is either a hobbit or hobbit-like, and so resistant to it. Like, even though he had it for all those hundreds of years, it did not totally overtake. Like, he didn't just go walking into Mordor with holding it out for Sauron. He had resistance to it, but it had become a part of him for so long that he did not want to let go of it. So when he finds Frodo and Frodo has the ring, he calls him master, because Frodo is the master of the ring. But the ring is still Gollum's precious. It's something that he is so longing for, longing to have back. And so he's waging a war within himself. It's kind of like Paul saying, I do things I don't want to do, and I don't do things I want to do. Oh, wretched man that I am. We see that in Gollum slash Smeagol. Gollum is the choking name, the bad name for him. And Smeagol was his original name when he was just living a frolicky normal life hundreds of years ago above the ground. He gets to the point of not wanting to be in the sunlight, doesn't like light at all. Probably a picture of people who are evil not wanting to be in the light, not wanting to be in the light as he is in the light. And from the movie, this is the fight. So Gollum's on the left side, talking about killing Frodo or taking the ring or whatever evil he's talking about. And Smeagol's, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. He's my master. He's the master of the ring. And so this constant battle where Gollum is trying to find a time to get that ring back. But at the same time, he wants to please the master of the ring, who right now is Frodo. So it's really a debate going on within him. All right, I'm checking the time. So here are what the contents pages look like. And I thought I would use this just to talk about the different books and maybe highlight a few things here. There's a lot that goes on, and there are way more characters. So you look at the chapter 4. They take a shortcut through the mushrooms. Well, I forget which hobbits now. I think Frodo was one of them. They used to steal mushrooms from the farmer there, Farmer Maggot. And so they're scared to go through the field, but then they decide to, and it ends up they all are, but there's a whole story there about the farmer and his wife and the farmer's bravery to protect them from he had either had talked to, or later he would talk to one of these riders, these black riders who are the 9 ring holders of evil. And so really you see just a lot of things here and there. They are supposed to head to a place called the Prancing Pony. It's an inn and restaurant and bar. It's just an inn would be the best place to put it. And they do meet Strider there, who is Aragorn. So it's really cool. It's a good, it's a good thing that they got to where they were going. The Council of Elrond is where they determine that this ring needs to go back to Mordor. Again, some of the people just, why don't we use this? This is a ring of power. Why don't we use it to defeat them? And Gandalf and Elrond and some of the others who know, just make it clear that's not possible. It has to be destroyed. It overtakes whoever has it. And on we go. A really beautiful scene, chapter 6 of book 2 in Lothlorien. That's another realm of elves there. And then they go down the Great River, and I'm gonna, sorry for those of you who will be listening to this later. But the Great River is right here, and they're going down the river, or I'm sorry, it's on this side. They've gotten through, and I got a little bit confused for a second. Oh, yeah, so I get back to the microphone. So the ring heads south with the Fellowship. Chapter 5 of book 2, Gandalf, everyone thinks has died. There's a Balrog, that's an evil character I have not mentioned yet. Doesn't defeat him exactly, but Gandalf is brought down by his whip and falls into the abyss. So we no longer have Gandalf with us, but they end up getting through the mountains. And so here's the Great River. And they go down, they go down the Great River. And the book doesn't quite end, but here's where the Ergonath is. And it's these huge giant statues that are literally 100 feet tall each. They are on each side of the river. And that's kind of where the book 2 and the whole book of Fellowship of the Ring ends. Not quite, but they're just past that, and they're down the river a little bit farther, and that's where the Fellowship breaks up. And Sam and Frodo go off together, and the rest. The interesting thing, the thing that's really kind of neat, Saruman, he wants that ring to be able to say, "Hey, Sauron, I got it. Here it is," or maybe who knows what his motives might have been. But so he instructs the Uruk-hai not to kill the hobbits. So they grab Merry and Pippin, but they won't kill them. And along the way in the book, it's really funny because people want to eat them all the time. These Uruk-hai, they want to, let's eat them. Look at how good they look and how fresh the meat would be. And, they want it, but we have orders. So that they constantly, that's a little overstatement, but there are several little moments where, you wonder if Merry and Pippin are going to get eaten by these evil orc creatures. But they're not. They keep with their orders, and they do not kill the hobbits. So that's how Merry and Pippin live. They snatch them up thinking we've got exactly what our master Saruman wants, and they head off back to Orthanc, or Orthanc. So anyway, and you can see the last chapter of the Fellowship of the Rings, the breaking of the Fellowship. All right, and then in the second book, all the different, it's almost 10 till, so just you can look up these chapter titles. If you get the books, obviously you can read through them and see the different ways it goes. The top is all having to do with Merry and Pippin, and then Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli trying to save them. So you have the Uruk-hai carrying them off to get back to Saruman, and you have Gimli, Legolas, and Aragorn. I mean, just running. I mean, obviously this is fiction, but it's just amazing, their stamina, and it really comes through in all this. And you can, in it, not just that part of the story, but the story of the other men, the story of Gondor and Rowan, because that's where they're traveling through. And so, well, I'll show you that real quick. So here's Rohan right here. Here's Gondor right here. And so the story centers on this and the breakup of the people right past the Argonath. And so we learn of Theoden, we learn of Eowyn and Eomer, and just that whole part of the story. And then the last half of the book, it says the taming of Smeagol. This is where Frodo, they know that he's following them because he wants the ring. And so the taming of him, Frodo decides we need a guide. We don't know how to get into Mordor. We don't know how to go. Just Frodo and Sam. So they have Smeagol. They don't hire him exactly, but they decide to let him lead, and that's what happens. So lots of trouble here. Gollum gets the plan once he finds out that they don't want to go through the front door of Mordor. He gets the plan to take them the back way, and that's where they face Shelob, the spider. And so he says, so Smeagol doesn't have to kill the Master of the Ring then. He'll let Shelob do it, and Shelob won't care about a ring. And so he just figures eventually I'll find it and all the waste and the, whatever there in Shelob's lair. And so that's the next to last chapter. And then the choices of Master Samwise, that's when he has to just kind of decide what to do. And he takes the ring, takes Sting, and then we go to the next book, Return of the King. Obviously Aragorn, or I shouldn't say obviously, but Aragorn is also a Christ figure in this. And the king coming home, the king being where the king ought to be. And that could be viewed concerning our very lives or concerning in a congregation or in the church at large. But we need to make sure Christ is where he's meant to be. But Aragorn finally gets to where he ought to be, king of the king of Gondor and the region north of Gondor. So let me see if there's anything. I'm gonna move on. Let's see. You see Mount Doom is chapter 3. And that's the page number 933. And then the last chapter, and that's when the ring's destroyed. And then 1021. So it goes another 100 pages. I don't know exactly how many pages, but the last chapter begins like 85 pages after that. So pretty interesting. I did put the appendices and the indices. You can look up all the songs. You can look up all the declarations through the whole. I mean, Tolkien wrote songs in his created language, the Elven language. I mean, it's just unbelievable, this work. It's just absolutely incredible. So to talk about the lessons, I decided I found a place where they had posters of quotes. So that seemed like a good way to kind of give some of the lessons. Some of these quotes are just frivolous. So, I mean, they're not all lessons, but Galadriel says, even the smallest person can change the course of the future. She's talking to Frodo, giving him hope and encouragement. I made a promise, Mr. Frodo, a promise. Don't you leave him, Samwise Gamgee. And I don't mean to. I don't mean to. So just Sam's loyalty, the lesson of loyalty, the lessons of hope are just very, very strong in here. This is where Gandalf dies. He doesn't exactly die, but he comes back as Gandalf the White. He's Gandalf the Gray through The Hobbit and through the first part of the Lord of the Rings books. He comes back as Gandalf the White. But just his stand against evil and his stand to protect his friends. He ends up dying in quotes again, I have to put it. They think he's dead. But that's a big quote in the book. It's mine, my own, my precious. And you would think that would be Gollum saying that, right? But no, Frodo says that. That's how much power this ring has. So that again, the ring as a character is a little weird, but the ring, there's power in that, and it's evil. And Frodo actually ends up saying things that Gollum had been saying. Or Bilbo says it here. Frodo also is reluctant to, this is actually Bilbo's quote. And that's right when Bilbo is supposed to leave it for Frodo, and he just can't quite get himself to do it, but he ends up doing it. All right, I would have gone with you to the end, into the very fires of Mordor. That's the great statement of Aragorn, letting Frodo know, he would have done it, but he knew that Frodo needed to take off. This task was appointed to you, and if you do not find a way, no one will. Another great quote from Galadriel. And we'll get to this in just a minute after the quotes. I'll just go ahead and say one of these points now. There are things that only we can do in our Christian walk. There are things where there are people only you will know. There are things that only you can do. And at the same time, that's true. There are things that we must do together, must do as a fellowship. And so really neat lessons there. Where was Gondor when the Westfold fell? So this is Theoden, and he's wanting to know why the steward of Gondor didn't send troops to help when they were in need, but he still does the right thing and goes and responds to the call of Gondor. So I always liked going south. Somehow it feels like going downhill. That's Treebeard. That's the walking tree. That's just frivolous. There's no meaning to that. It's just a fun quote. Let this be the hour when we draw swords together. So the teamwork idea. It's Theoden and Aragorn, and they think Helm's Deep is going to be taken. They're really losing. some of their hope. Aragorn knows Gandalf's going to be coming, or Gandalf gave hints that he'd be there, and he does show up. So they end up winning that battle. But let this be the hour when we draw swords together. Fell deeds awake, now for wrath, now for ruin, and the red dawn. Fourth, Eralingas. Saruman, a wizard should know better. Treebeard said that. Saruman used a lot of trees, cut down a lot of the forest to fuel what he was building there, making these weird half-orc creatures, and making swords, making weapons, and he just says it like it is. A wizard ought to know better. Saruman shouldn't have been doing that. And sometimes it takes a walking tree to let you know how things ought to be. Death is just another path, one that we all must take. Gandalf. And then I am no man. I told you this part of the story already. Eowyn. Authority is not given to you to deny the return of the king. What a cool statement is that. Gandalf says that to the steward of Gondor, the one who ends up killing himself, Denethor. And then it's the deep breath before the plunge, the quiet before the battle. And then for Frodo, Aragorn says that as they're trying to just buy him some time. And then Jennifer's favorite quote, I can't, and I thought it might have just been a movie quote, but it's in the book. Sam says to Frodo, I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you. And Sam puts Frodo on his back in the book. Again, I thought some of the things I thought maybe that was just how they made the movie more dramatic, but no, it's Tolkien. Really, really cool. All right, here's those little lessons. And then I've got another list, but there are things only you can do. Some things require a fellowship. Sometimes you need to pull a Gandalf with the Balrog. So sometimes you just need to sacrifice yourself for the sake of others. In fact, that's what we're called to do every single day as Christians. Take up your cross daily, die to self. Jesus said, follow me. Be careful whose counsel you keep. This is in the movie, this is how this was depicted. That's Grima Wormtongue whispering, literally whispering, but whispering into Theoden's head. And the book does a good job of describing how Theoden, it was like he didn't even know if he could hold a sword. And again, I thought that might be something they added kind of into the movie, but that's in the books. Tolkien wrote that, how he had lost his energy, he had lost even his ability to stand up straight. And once Gandalf gets rid of Wormtongue, he gets it's almost you wouldn't call it miraculous, but it's an immediate change. He let that evil go. He wasn't listening to that evil anymore. And then he's able to be who he's supposed to be. A great lesson for us. And then finally, don't be fooled. Even the honorable can be tempted. And I think that just fits right in with pride and how, we're going to fall. We're going to mess up if we're full of pride, if we're full of self. This is Galadriel actually withstanding the pressure. Frodo offers her the ring, and she resists, and so pretty cool. And then these I meant to have them come in one at a time. I forgot to do that. But the book really centers in on a bunch of themes. One is the idea of good versus evil. For me personally, I like the shows where that's what's happening. I like the FBI shows on Tuesday nights on CBS. Little plug for well, I like them because it's good versus evil. We still have some cop shows out there. We still have some shows out there. In fact, the ones that get good ratings, they're the ones where people are fighting evil, where there's someone in need and people go and help, whether it's a legal situation or an actual kidnapping or whatever it is. But good versus evil, and that's Tolkien fully, especially after his experiences in World War I, many people feel, he really felt the importance of good triumphing over evil and just how awful World War I was. Just, I mean, all these wars are awful, but World War I was just really rough, really rough. The whole idea of life and death. Gandalf and others in the books have a good perspective on death. In fact, Sam and Frodo, they don't expect to return. They expect to destroy the ring and die. I mean, that's really what their expectations are. It comes out several times throughout the book. They have a quest, they have a goal, and it's to destroy this evil, and they don't really have any thought that they'll be returning. And so the perspective on death and how it's okay to die. Now, again, Tolkien doesn't do a direct allegory, or he doesn't make the comparisons and the Christian themes come through, explicitly, but you kind of see it with Gandalf dying, but then coming back as Gandalf the White. But the perspective on death and when it's appropriate, or the things that are worth dying for, comes out very clearly in this. But at the same time, the idea of life. You're the one. Galadriel tells Frodo, you are the ring bearer. That is who you are now, and you need to do it. And so really powerful. Friendship, huge in this. Legolas and Gimli, the elf and the dwarf, would be one of the greatest examples of this, showing that people can be united and people can care about each other, even if in the world's eyes they're not supposed to. The power of faith and belief. And I'll mention something here. I just didn't know how to, I mentioned it to Greg a week or two ago. Tolkien really cares about language, and knew a bunch of languages and created a bunch of languages, but he cared about it and knew that the way we speak, the way we communicate, and the things that come out matter. And that comes through in these books. And so the power of faith in the Tolkien book, we know the power of faith based on the Bible, but here, the power even of good self-talk, like an athlete who can visualize what he or she wants to accomplish and how much that helps in the accomplishment. The studies prove it. You shoot 10 free throws, you visualize 10 free throws, and you're going to improve as much as the person who does 20, and maybe even more. And so the power of the language and not speaking, like Gandalf would not speak the language of Mordor in certain places. He just wouldn't even speak it. That's an evil language, and we're not going to talk that way. And so really, and when he does at the Fellowship, he does at the Council of Elrond, and the sky goes black. And I mean, it's just, the power of language. I just want to mention that, along with this idea of faith and belief. The consequences of greed, all these people who, Pippin at one point wants to look into that one crystal ball, and it's a devastating act for him. He never was quite the same again. But just people wanting things that they shouldn't want throughout this. So the consequences of greed, evaluating who you trust, kind of the worm tongue and Theoden, although there was some power at work there beyond the norm. But who are you going to trust? Gandalf trusted Saruman and ends up out of the picture for months, being held hostage. And we all have work to do once again. So I highly recommend the books. It didn't take me a long time to reread them. I kind of purposefully didn't fly through them, just so I could kind of soak in a little bit. So I recommend them. I recommend the movies highly. Peter Jackson did a great job. There's not a whole lot of embellishment. The extended version, yeah, Lynn is pointing out the extended versions are even better than the regular versions. If you watch all 3 extended versions, I think it's about 11 hours. I think they're 3.5 each, just about the extended, and they're long enough as they are. But yeah, the extended versions are really, really cool. So they're 3 to 3.5 hours each. So whatever you want to do with that. But does anyone have anything? There are so many things we could talk about with these books, but does anyone want to add anything or mention anything? If you ask something, I'll turn that over to Greg. Anyone? All right. Well, let's, Peter, would you say a prayer for us as we close out tonight? All right, thanks.
Father, we are grateful for this time that we can come together here and look at these works that men have written that certainly have some good influence and good messages. They can sometimes parallel some of the things that we need to be thinking of as members of your church. But we pray that as we go our ways, that we would represent you in all the things that we do, and glorify you in all the things that we are. When we pray for each one, you say something in Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen. And let's all thank Greg for putting this together every year. Hey, Greg.